My colleague betrayed me at work, but at the office party, I took the mic and played a video that ended her career. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I should have known something was wrong when Sarah started complimenting my ideas too much. For the first year of our friendship, she'd been refreshingly honest about my work, supportive but critical, encouraging but never effusive. Sarah Chen was the kind of colleague who'd tell you when your presentation needed work, who'd catch typos in your emails before you sent them to clients, who'd stay late to help you refine a campaign concept until it sang. She was brilliant, ambitious, and brutally honest. I respected her for it. That's why I trusted her. We'd started at Morrison Associates within a week of each other, two junior creatives thrown into the deep end of Chicago's most demanding advertising agency. The first few months were brutal, 18-hour days, impossible deadlines, creative directors who could reduce grown adults to tears with a single glance. Sarah and I survived by sticking together. We shared takeout dinners in empty conference rooms, traded feedback on each other's concepts, and developed the kind of shorthand that comes from surviving corporate warfare side by side. By our second year, we'd found our rhythm. Sarah was naturally strategic, brilliant at seeing the big picture and understanding client psychology. I was the ideation machine, the one who could generate 50 concepts before lunch and somehow know which 3 were worth developing. We complemented each other perfectly. Or so I thought. The first crack in my trust appeared during the Henderson Electronics account review. I'd been struggling with their rebrand for weeks, trying to find an angle that would differentiate them in an overcrowded market. The breakthrough came during one of our late-night brainstorming sessions in Sarah's office. What if we position them as the anti-tech tech company? I'd said, pacing in front of her whiteboard. Like, everyone else is pushing artificial intelligence and smart everything, but Henderson makes things that just work. Reliable, uncomplicated, human-centered technology. Sarah's eyes had lit up. That's brilliant. The tagline could be something like Simply Smart or Human Technology. Nah, Human Technology, I'd repeated, feeling that familiar spark of a concept clicking into place. Yes, that's it. We'd spent the next 2 hours developing the campaign framework. I'd outlined the creative approach while Sarah refined the strategy. It felt like genuine collaboration, the kind of creative partnership I'd dreamed about when I first entered advertising. 3 days later, I'd watch Sarah present her human technology concept to our creative director. She delivered it flawlessly, walking through the strategic thinking and creative execution with the confidence of someone who'd conceived every element herself. When Marcus, our CD, had praised the innovative positioning, Sarah had smiled and accepted the compliment without a glance in my direction. I'd convinced myself it was a misunderstanding. We'd worked on it together after all. Maybe she'd forgotten to mention my contribution. Maybe she'd assumed Marcus already knew I'd been involved. Maybe I was being oversensitive. But something cold had settled in my stomach, a tiny voice whispering that I'd just witnessed something important that I didn't fully understand yet. The Henderson campaign became Sarah's first major success at the agency. It won 2 industry awards and landed us 3 new clients in the electronics space. Sarah got promoted to senior creative, while I remained stuck in the junior ranks, watching someone else build their reputation on what had started as my idea. I should have said something then. I should have marched into Marcus's office and demanded credit for my contribution. Instead, I rationalized. Sarah had developed the strategy. She'd refined the messaging. She'd sold it to the client. Maybe my initial spark of inspiration wasn't enough to claim ownership of the entire campaign. That rationalization would haunt me for the next 18 months. The pattern started small and grew systematically. Sarah would ask for my input on her projects, always framing it as seeking a fresh perspective or bouncing ideas around. I'd share my thoughts freely, excited to contribute to work that seemed important and challenging. Days or weeks later, I'd see those same ideas presented by Sarah to leadership or clients, polished and refined, but fundamentally unchanged from what I'd suggested. When I started noticing the pattern, I tried addressing it indirectly. Hey, I saw you presented the Morrison nostalgia concept to the client. How did it go? Oh, that went great, she'd reply. They loved the strategic approach. I think positioning them as the brand that understands millennial childhood was exactly what they needed to hear. The Morrison nostalgia concept, the strategic approach, positioning them as the brand that understands millennial childhood. All phrases I'd used when I'd first explained my idea to her over coffee 3 weeks earlier. Yeah, I remember when we were discussing that, I'd say carefully. It seemed like such a natural fit for their brand. Absolutely. Sometimes the best ideas come from really diving deep into consumer psychology. Not when we were discussing it. Not your idea about millennial nostalgia. Just a smooth redirect that acknowledged nothing while claiming everything. I started keeping notes. Not because I planned to do anything with them, but because I needed to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. Each time Sarah presented something that sounded familiar, I'd check my records. The patterns were undeniable. The Silverstone finance pitch about money that moves with your life had originated from my observation that traditional banking felt static compared to how people actually lived. The Brightwater Restaurant Group campaign about authentic experiences in an artificial world had started with my rant about Instagram culture and the hunger for genuine connections. The Nexus technology launch strategy had grown from my insight about tech-fatigued consumers wanting products that enhanced rather than complicated their lives. All of it, systematically harvested from our conversations and presented as Sarah's original thinking. But I still didn't act. Part of me feared I was wrong, that I was becoming paranoid and possessive about ideas that might have naturally occurred to anyone. Part of me feared I was right, that confronting Sarah would destroy the one genuine friendship I'd developed at the agency. And part of me feared that even if I could prove my contributions, no one would care. In advertising, execution matters more than inspiration. Strategy trumps creativity. And Sarah was undeniably brilliant at both. The shift in our relationship was subtle but steady. Where once she'd sought my input as an equal, now she consulted me like a junior researcher. Where once we'd collaborated on concepts together, now she'd assign me specific tasks while keeping the big picture to herself. Where once she'd shared credit in team meetings, now my contributions became helpful research or useful background information. I found myself working harder to impress her, generating more ideas, refining concepts more thoroughly, hoping to reclaim the partnership we'd once shared. Instead, I was unknowingly feeding her success while starving my own. The breaking point should have come during the quarterly reviews. While Sarah received glowing feedback about her innovative thinking and strategic creativity, I was told that my work lacked strategic depth and that I needed to think more broadly about campaign development. The irony was suffocating. I was being criticized for not demonstrating the very skills that Sarah had built her reputation on by stealing my work. But even then, I didn't connect the dots. I internalized the feedback, convinced that I needed to work harder, think smarter, prove myself more thoroughly. I started working evenings and weekends, developing concepts and strategies that I'd share with Sarah for feedback, hoping to learn from her success. She was always encouraging, always supportive, always helpful in refining my ideas until they were presentation ready. And then, inevitably, those polished concepts would appear in Sarah's portfolio, while mine remained empty of anything impressive enough to showcase. The Hartwell Industries opportunity changed everything. It was the biggest pitch of the year, a complete rebranding and campaign strategy for a manufacturing company trying to modernize their image. The account was worth over $2 million and would establish whoever won it as a major player in the agency. Both Sarah and I were assigned to develop competing approaches, with the best concept moving forward to the client presentation. For the first time in months, I was working on something that would be entirely mine. No collaboration, no shared brainstorming, no opportunities for confusion about who had contributed what. Just me, the client brief, and 6 weeks to develop the campaign that could change my career. I threw myself into the research with an intensity I hadn't felt since my first year at the agency. I interviewed Hartwell's employees, studied their competition, analyzed their customer base, and immersed myself in their industry until I understood their challenges better than they did themselves. The breakthrough came during a late-night dive into manufacturing industry trends. Hartwell's problem wasn't their products. It was their perception. They were seen as old-fashioned, traditional, stuck in the past. But their actual capabilities were cutting edge. They were using advanced automation, sustainable practices, and innovative materials. The disconnect between perception and reality was massive. That's when I saw it. Hartwell wasn't behind the times. They were ahead of the curve. While other manufacturers chased flashy marketing and trendy positioning, Hartwell had quietly built a company focused on what actually mattered: quality, reliability, and innovation, without gimmicks. The campaign concept crystallized, built forward. Hartwell Industries wasn't just manufacturing products, they were manufacturing the future. But unlike the sleek, sterile futurism that dominated tech marketing, Hartwell's future was grounded in substance. Real materials, real craftsmanship, real innovation that improved people's lives rather than just impressing them. I developed the entire strategic framework over the course of 3 weeks. Target audience analysis that identified decision-makers who valued substance over flash. Messaging architecture that positioned quality as the ultimate innovation. Creative executions that showcased Hartwell's advanced capabilities while emphasizing their practical benefits. Media strategies that reached influencers and decision-makers in industrial design, architecture, and manufacturing. It was the best work I'd ever done. Comprehensive, strategic, creative, and completely defensible from every angle. For the first time in months, I felt like I was operating at my full potential. I was also paranoid about protecting it. Maybe it was months of watching my ideas migrate to Sarah's portfolio, or maybe it was the instinctive recognition that this campaign could change everything for me. But I kept the Hartwell work completely private. I didn't mention it to Sarah. I didn't ask for feedback. I didn't even work on it in the office, instead developing everything on my personal laptop at home. 2 days before the internal presentation, I was ready. The strategy was solid, the creative was compelling, and the business case was airtight. I'd practiced the presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep. For the first time in over a year, I felt confident about my work. That confidence lasted until 8:30 a.m. on presentation day, when I arrived at the office to discover that my computer had crashed overnight. Every file was corrupted, months of work gone. I called IT in a panic, but they explained that a server update had caused compatibility issues with several older machines. They could probably recover the files, but it would take days, maybe weeks. The presentation was in 4 hours. I was devastated and desperate. That's when Sarah knocked on my office door. "Emma, you look terrible. What's wrong?" I explained the situation, watching her face shift from concern to sympathy to something that looked almost like relief. "Oh my God, that's awful. But wait, didn't you back up your files?" I had, but only to my work computer, which was equally corrupted. In my paranoia about keeping the project secret, I'd created a single point of failure that had just destroyed months of work. "Look," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I know we've been competing on this, but this is bigger than office politics. The agency needs to put forward the best possible campaign. Why don't you tell me what you were planning to present, and I'll see if I can incorporate your ideas into my approach. That way, something from your work survives, even if the presentation isn't exactly what you planned." It felt like salvation. I was so grateful, so relieved that someone was offering to help, that I didn't question the logistics of how she could suddenly reorganize her entire presentation around my concepts. I just started talking. I walked her through everything: the built-forward positioning, the target audience analysis, the messaging framework, the creative executions, the media strategy, the implementation timeline. Everything I'd developed over 6 weeks of intensive work, I handed to Sarah in a 2-hour download session. She took detailed notes, asked thoughtful questions, and offered encouraging comments about the strength of my strategic thinking. By the time we finished, I felt cautiously optimistic that maybe collaboration could still save the situation. This is really strong work, Emma. I think I can weave a lot of this into what I've already prepared. It won't be exactly your presentation, but your strategic insights will definitely be represented. 3 hours later, I sat in the conference room watching Sarah present my campaign. Not elements of my campaign, not concepts inspired by my work. My actual campaign, delivered word for word as I had outlined it to her that morning. The built-forward positioning, the target audience insights, the messaging framework, the creative executions, even specific phrases I'd use to describe the strategy. The only thing that had changed was the presenter. I felt physically sick. Around the conference table, Marcus and the other senior creatives were nodding appreciatively. The strategy director was taking notes. Even our notoriously difficult CEO looked impressed. "Brilliant positioning, Sarah," Marcus said as she wrapped up. "The built-forward concept perfectly captures what makes Hartwell unique, and the strategic framework is incredibly thorough." "Thank you," Sarah replied smoothly. I really wanted to dig deep into what makes them different from their competitors. The research phase was extensive, but I think it paid off in terms of strategic insight. The research phase. Strategic insight. As if she'd spent weeks developing what I'd handed her 3 hours earlier. I tried to speak up. "Actually, Emma's been incredibly helpful with background research," Sarah interrupted. "Her insights into the manufacturing industry were really valuable." Background research. Insights. As if I'd been her research assistant rather than the architect of the entire campaign. I left the meeting in a daze. By evening, word had spread through the agency that Sarah had developed a breakthrough strategy for Hartwell. By the next morning, she'd been selected to present to the client. By the end of the week, we'd won the account. Sarah's career trajectory shifted into overdrive. The Hartwell win established her as one of the agency's rising stars. She was promoted to creative director, given her own team, and started appearing in industry publications as an example of strategic creative thinking. I was assigned to her team as a junior creative. The demotion was presented as a lateral move, an opportunity to learn from one of our most promising creative leaders. But everyone understood what it meant. I'd failed to deliver on the biggest opportunity of my career, while Sarah had succeeded spectacularly. The hierarchy was clear. Working for Sarah was psychological torture. Every day, I had to watch her manage the Hartwell account that should have been mine. I had to attend strategy meetings where she discussed her campaign framework with the confidence of someone who'd conceived every element herself. I had to sit through client presentations where she fielded questions about strategic decisions I'd made, creative concepts I'd developed, and insights I'd generated. Worse, she continued to mine my ideas for her other projects. Now that I reported to her, she could frame it as mentorship and collaboration. She'd ask me to contribute some fresh thinking to her pitches, then present my contributions as examples of her creative leadership. The breaking point came 6 months later, during my performance review. "Emma, I have to be honest," Marcus said, looking uncomfortable. "Your work has been inconsistent. You used to generate really compelling concepts, but lately everything feels derivative. Sarah mentioned that you've been struggling with strategic thinking, and I have to agree. Your ideas lack the depth and insight we need at this level. Derivative. Lacking depth and insight. I was being criticized for not demonstrating the qualities that Sarah had built her reputation on by systematically stealing my work. I think maybe you need to consider whether creative strategy is the right fit for you," Marcus continued. "Have you thought about moving to account management? Or maybe project coordination?" I was being pushed out. Not fired outright, but gradually marginalized until I'd have no choice but to leave. Sarah's theft had been so systematic, so complete, that I no longer had a portfolio of work to defend myself with. Everything good I'd done had been claimed by someone else. That night, I went home and cried for the first time since college. Not just from disappointment or frustration, but from the dawning recognition that I'd been manipulated and exploited by someone I'd trusted completely. Sarah hadn't just stolen my ideas. She'd systematically destroyed my confidence, my reputation, and my career while making me complicit in my own downfall. I was ready to quit, to find a new job at a smaller agency, except that I'd been outmaneuvered, and start over with whatever scraps of dignity I had left. Instead, I got angry. The anger started small, a low-burning resentment that kept me awake at night. But as I replayed 18 months of interactions with Sarah, the anger grew into something harder and more focused. I'd been betrayed, but I'd also been stupid. I'd handed my career to someone who'd been systematically dismantling it, and I'd never even tried to protect myself. That was going to change. I started documenting everything. Every email Sarah had sent me asking for input on her projects. Every text message where she'd requested feedback or clarification on concepts. every meeting where I'd shared ideas that later appeared in her presentations. The evidence was overwhelming once I started looking for it. Years of electronic communications that told the story of systematic idea theft. Messages where Sarah asked me to explain strategic frameworks that she later presented as her own innovations. Emails where she requested research and analysis that became the foundation of her campaign recommendations. But emails and text messages could be dismissed as collaborative work. I needed something more definitive. That's when I remembered the Zoom recordings. Morrison Associates recorded all internal meetings for compliance and training purposes. The recordings were stored on a shared server that all employees could access. I'd never paid attention to them before, but now they represented a goldmine of evidence. I spent weeks combing through months of recorded meetings. Strategy sessions where I'd outlined concepts that Sarah later claimed. Brainstorming meetings where I'd suggested approaches that became her breakthrough thinking. Client calls where I'd provided insights that she'd later presented as examples of her strategic expertise. The most damning evidence was a series of recordings from my first 6 months on the Hartwell account. Long before my computer crashed, long before I'd shared my strategy with Sarah, I'd been developing my approach in team meetings and strategy sessions. The recordings showed me walking through early versions of the built-forward concept, discussing target audience insights, and outlining creative directions that would later become the campaign Sarah presented. I had proof, undeniable, time-stamped video evidence that Sarah had built her career on stolen work. Not just inspired by my ideas, not just influenced by our collaborations, but direct theft of concepts I'd developed and strategies I'd created. Now I just needed to decide what to do with it. My first instinct was to march into Marcus's office and demand justice. But I'd learned enough about office politics to know that approach would backfire. Sarah was now the agency's golden child, the creative director who'd landed their biggest account. I was a struggling junior creative with a reputation for inconsistent work. Even with evidence, it would be my word against hers, and she had 18 months of stolen success to defend her credibility. I needed a different approach, something public enough that it couldn't be dismissed or covered up. Something dramatic enough that the evidence would speak louder than office politics. The opportunity came in the form of Hartwell Industries' anniversary celebration. 3 months after winning the account, Hartwell was throwing a major event to celebrate their 50th anniversary and the launch of their new brand campaign. The party was being held at a trendy warehouse venue in downtown Chicago, with the full agency staff, key clients, and local media invited. It was designed to be a celebration of Hartwell's transformation and Sarah's creative leadership. I almost didn't go. I'd already accepted a position at a smaller agency across town, and my last day at Morrison Associates was the following week. Returning to celebrate Sarah's success felt masochistic, but something made me RSVP yes. Maybe it was curiosity about how the evening would unfold. Maybe it was a need for closure, or maybe it was the recognition that I'd never have another opportunity like this. A room full of witnesses. A celebration of work that should have been mine, and a chance to finally tell the truth. I spent weeks preparing. I compiled the most compelling evidence into a presentation that told the story chronologically, showing the progression from my original concepts to Sarah's breakthrough strategies. I practiced the timing, refined the narrative, and prepared for every possible response. The night of the party, I dressed carefully. Professional but memorable. Confident, but not confrontational. I wanted to look like someone who belonged at the celebration, right up until the moment I revealed that I was the person who deserved to be celebrated. The venue was perfect for my purposes. The warehouse space had exposed brick walls, dramatic lighting, and a professional AV setup for presentations. There was even a small stage where speakers could address the entire crowd. Sarah was in her element. She wore a stunning black dress and moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been caught in a lie. I watched her accept congratulations, pose for photos, and discuss her strategic thinking with industry contacts. Every smile was built on stolen work. Every compliment was earned with my ideas. The evening began with the standard corporate celebration rituals. Hartwell's CEO gave a speech about innovation and partnership. Our agency's CEO praised the collaborative spirit that had made the campaign possible. Marcus introduced Sarah as an example of the creative excellence that defined Morrison Associates. Then Sarah took the stage, She delivered a flawless presentation about her strategic process and creative development. She walked the audience through the research insights that had shaped the campaign, the strategic framework that had guided the creative and the innovative thinking that had made the built-forward concept so compelling. Every word was stolen. Every insight was mine. Every strategic decision she described was one I'd made during long nights of research and development that she'd never participated in. The crowd was captivated. She spoke with passion and authority about work she'd never actually done, ideas she'd never actually conceived, and strategies she'd never actually developed. It was a masterclass in confident presentation of stolen intellectual property. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Camera flashes lit up the room. People crowded around the stage to congratulate her on her brilliant work. That's when I made my move. I walked calmly to the stage, where Sarah was still basking in the recognition. She saw me approaching and smiled, probably expecting me to add my congratulations to the chorus of praise. "Sarah, could I borrow the microphone for just a moment?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. She couldn't refuse without making a scene. Her smile faltered slightly, but she handed me the microphone and stepped aside. "Thank you all for such a wonderful celebration," I began, looking out at the crowd of colleagues, clients, and industry contacts. "I wanted to take just a moment to share something with you, something I think will add some important context to tonight's presentation." I pulled out my phone and approached the AV control station. "Before we continue celebrating, I'd like to show you some video footage. I think it will help tell the complete story of how the Built Forward campaign was really developed." The room fell silent as I connected my phone to the presentation system. The large screens around the venue flickered to life, showing a familiar conference room from our agency. "This is a recording from a strategy meeting 15 months ago," I announced, 6 weeks before Sarah presented the Hartwell campaign to our leadership team. The video began playing. It showed me, working from home with a visible fever, joining a team meeting via Zoom. My voice filled the room as I began explaining my initial research into Hartwell Industries. "The key insight," Pasmi was saying, "is that Hartwell isn't behind the curve. They're ahead of it. While other manufacturers are chasing flashy marketing, Hartwell has quietly built a company focused on what actually matters. They're not just making products, they're manufacturing the future, built forward, not just moving forward." I could feel the energy in the room shift. Conversations stopped. People pulled out their phones to record. Sarah's face had gone pale. "Here's another meeting from 2 weeks later," I continued as the first video ended, where I outlined the complete strategic framework. The second video showed me walking through the target audience analysis, the messaging architecture, and the creative direction. Every element that Sarah had presented as her breakthrough thinking was there, fully developed and articulated by me weeks before she'd ever seen it. "And here," I said as a third video began, "is the meeting where I presented the final campaign concept to our internal team." The footage showed me delivering a comprehensive presentation of the Built Forward strategy, the positioning, the creative executions, the media approach, the implementation timeline, everything Sarah had claimed as her own work, presented by me in detail 6 weeks before her supposed breakthrough. The silence in the room was absolute. "For 18 months, I said, my voice steady and clear, I watched a colleague systematically steal my work while destroying my career. I was told I lacked strategic insight, that my ideas weren't sophisticated enough, that I needed to think more broadly about campaign development." I looked directly at Sarah, who was now visibly shaking. What I actually lacked was the ability to recognize that someone I trusted was mining every conversation we had for material to build her own reputation. Every brainstorming session, every casual discussion about strategy, every moment when I shared my thinking, all of it was being harvested and repackaged as someone else's innovation. Sarah tried to speak, but I continued. "The campaign you've been celebrating tonight, the strategy, the insights, the creative direction, all of it was developed by someone who's no longer at this agency, someone who was pushed out for failing to demonstrate the very capabilities that made tonight's celebration possible." I held up my phone, showing a text conversation. Should I read the messages where Sarah asked me to explain the strategic framework she later presented as her own breakthrough thinking? Or should I show you the emails where she requested my research and analysis for the client presentation? The crowd was completely silent. Camera phones were recording from every angle. The Hartwell executives were whispering urgently among themselves. Marcus looked like he might be sick. I kept copies of everything, I continued. Every email requesting my input on her projects. Every text asking for clarification on concepts she later claimed. Every recording of meetings where I developed the ideas she would later present as her own innovations. Sarah finally found her voice. This is completely out of context, she said, her voice shaking. Creative work is collaborative. Emma contributed to these projects, of course, but... Collaborative? I interrupted. Is that what you call recording our private conversations so you could steal my ideas more effectively? Is that what you call asking me to explain strategic concepts so you could understand them well enough to present them as your own? I addressed the room again. I have 18 months of evidence documenting the systematic theft of intellectual property. Not collaboration, not inspiration, but direct plagiarism of work I developed independently and shared in confidence. The room was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning humming. Someone near the back whispered, "Holy shit." I'm not here for an apology, I said, looking around the room at faces frozen in shock and recognition. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because the truth deserves to be heard. For over a year, I watched someone build a career on my stolen work while I was marginalized, criticized, and eventually pushed out of an agency where I'd given everything I had. I turned back to Sarah, who was now crying. You asked me to explain my strategic thinking because you wanted to understand it well enough to steal it. You recorded our brainstorming sessions because you needed reference material for your presentations. You positioned yourself as my mentor while systematically destroying my career. I disconnected my phone from the AV system and stepped back from the microphone. The work being celebrated tonight was conceived, developed, and refined by someone who was told she wasn't strategic enough to succeed in this industry. I hope watching my stolen campaign win awards was worth destroying someone's career for. I walked toward the exit, the crowd parting silently before me. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations, the scrape of chairs, and what sounded like Sarah sobbing. Just before I reached the door, I heard someone start clapping, then another person, then several more. By the time I stepped outside into the Chicago night, nearly half the room was applauding. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within hours, videos of my presentation were circulating on LinkedIn, Twitter, and industry blogs. The story gained traction quickly. Junior creative exposees, systematic plagiarism at major agency, using video evidence to prove theft of award-winning campaign. The agency's response was damage control. They issued a statement about taking allegations of intellectual property violations seriously and conducting a thorough investigation into the matter. But the evidence was too overwhelming to dismiss. 3 days later, Sarah was quietly terminated. The official statement mentioned violations of company policy regarding intellectual property and professional conduct. Marcus was demoted, and the Hartwell account was reassigned to a team led by Jennifer Walsh, one of the few senior creatives who'd always operated with integrity. A week after the party, I got a call from Hartwell Industries directly. They'd seen the video, it had gone viral in advertising circles, and wanted to discuss bringing me on as a consultant for their next phase of expansion. They were embarrassed about being unknowingly complicit in the plagiarism and wanted to make it right. 6 months later, I was running my own creative consultancy with 4 major clients and a growing reputation for innovative strategic thinking. The viral video, while professionally devastating for Sarah, had established me as someone willing to fight for creative integrity. Clients appreciated that quality. Sarah, according to LinkedIn, had taken a position at a mid-tier agency in Denver. Her new title was Senior Creative, several steps down from the creative director position she'd held at Morrison Associates. Her bio no longer mentioned the Hartwell campaign. I don't think about her often anymore. But sometimes, when I'm presenting my work to clients or celebrating a successful campaign with my team, I remember that night. The moment when I finally found my voice again. The moment when truth cut through years of deception like a spotlight cutting through darkness. The microphone was just a tool. The real power was in finally refusing to be silenced, in choosing truth over comfort, in demanding recognition for work that had always been mine. I learned that justice doesn't always come through official channels or corporate policies. Sometimes it comes from standing up in front of a room full of witnesses and telling the truth with evidence that can't be dismissed or rationalized away. The camera, as it turned out, had always been on my side. I just needed to find the courage to press play. But the most important lesson came later, as I built my new career on work that was undeniably, unquestionably mine. Success feels different when you know you've earned it honestly. Recognition means more when it's based on genuine achievement rather than stolen ideas. Sarah taught me something valuable, even if she didn't mean to. The difference between collaboration and exploitation, between influence and theft, between earning success and stealing it. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone else's career. It's building your own on such solid ground that no one can ever take it away from you again. The truth has a way of surfacing, even when someone works very hard to bury it. Sometimes it takes months or years. Sometimes it takes a room full of witnesses and a microphone, but it always surfaces eventually, and when it does, you better be ready to own it.